Here we go. I'm going to put my own everyday readers on. We're going to read this romance of the gift of the magi. A husband and wife show each other the true meaning of love. And it's the perfect story for the holiday season kickoff, if you will. $1.87. That was all. And 60 cents of it was in pennies. Pennies saved 1 and 2 at a time by bulldozing the grocer and the vegetable man and the butcher until one's check burned with the silent imputation of parsimony that such close dealing implied. 3 times Della counted it. $1.87. And the next day would be Christmas. There was clearly nothing to do but flop down on the shabby little couch and howl. So Della did. Which instigates the moral reflection that life made up of sobs, sniffles, and smiles, with sniffles predominating. While the mistress of the home is gradually subsiding from the first stage to the second, take a look at the home. Furnished flat, $8 per week. It did not exactly beggar description, but it certainly had the word on the lookout for the medicine squad. In the vestibule below was a letter box into which no letter would go, an electric button from which no mortal finger could coax a ring. Also ascertaining through a tonneau was the card bearing the name Mr. James Dilligan Young. The Dilligam, quote-unquote, had been flung to the breeze during a former period of prosperity when its processor had been paid $30 a week. Now, when the income shrunk to $20, the letter Dilligam, quote-unquote, looked blurred, as though they were thinking seriously of contracting to a modest and unassuming the D. But whenever Mr. James Dillingham Young came home and reached his flat above, he called, quote-unquote, Jim, and greatly hugged by Mrs. James Dillingham Young, already introduced to you as Della, which is all very good. This is bugging me. Thank you. Okay. Della finished her cry and attended to her cheeks with the powder rag, and she stood by the window, looked out dully at a gray cat walking, a gray fence, and a gray backyard. Tomorrow would be Christmas Day, and she had only $1.87 with which to buy Jim a present. She had been saving every penny she could for months, with this result. $20 a week didn't go far. Expenses had been greater than she had calculated. They always are. Only $1.87 to buy a present for Jim, her Jim. Many a happy hour she'd spent planning for something nice for him, something fine, rare, and sterling, something just a little bit near being worthy of the honor of being owned by Jim. There was a pier glass between the window of the room. Perhaps you see a pier glass in an $8 flat. A very thin and very agile person may be observing his reflection in a rapid sequence of longitudinal strips, obtain a fairly accurate conception of his looks. Della, being slender, had mastered the art. Suddenly she whirled from the window and stood before the glass, her eyes shining brilliantly, but her face had lost its color within 20 seconds. Rapidly she pulled down her hair and let it fall to its full length. Now there was 2 possessions of James Dillinger Young, in which they both took a mighty pride. One was Jim's gold watch that had been his father's, his grandfather's, and the other was Della's hair. Had the Queen of Sheba lived in a flat across the air shaft, Della would have let her hair hang out the window some day, just to dry to reciprocate Her Majesty's jewels and gifts. Had King Solomon been the janitor with all of his treasures piled up in the basement, Jim would have pulled out his wrench or his watch every time he passed, just to see him pluck at his beard from envy. So now Della's beautiful hair fell about her, rippling and shining like a cascade of brown water. It reached below her knee, and it made itself in almost to a garment for her. And then she did it up again, nervously and quick. Once she faltered for a minute and stood there while a tear or two splashed on the worn red carpet. On went her red-brown jacket, on went her old brown hat, with a whirl of skirts, and the brilliant sparkle still in her eyes, she fluttered out the door and down the stairs to the street. Where she was stopped again read the sign, M.M.E. Sofroni, hair goods of all kinds. One flight up, Della ran and collected herself, panting. Madam, large, too white, chilly, hardly looking the Sofroni. "Will you buy my hair?" asked Della. "I buy hair," said Madame. "Take your hat off and let's have a sight of the looks of it." Down rippled the brown cascade. $20, Madame, lifting the mass and precise hand. "Give it to me quick," said Della, and the next 2 hours tripped by on rosy wings. Forget the hash metaphor. She was ransacking the stores for Jim's present. She found it at last. It surely had made for Jim and no one else. There was no one like it in any other stores, and she had turned to them all inside out. It was a platinum fob chain, simple, chaste in design, properly proclaiming its value by substance alone and not by merciless ornamentation, as all of the good things should do. It was even worthy of the watch. As soon as she saw it, and she knew that it must be Jim's, it was like him, quietness and the value. The description applied to both. $21 they took from her for it. She hurried home with the 87 cents that the chain on his watch. Jim might be properly anxious about the time in any company, grand as the watch was. He sometimes looked at it on the sly on the account of the old leather strap used in place of the chain. When Della reached home, her intoxication gave way. A little prudence and reason. She got out her curling irons and lightened the gas and went up to repairing the ravages made by the generously added to love, which is always a tremendous task. Dear friends, a mammoth task. Within 40 minutes her head was covered with tiny, low-lying curls that made her look wonderfully like a truant schoolboy. She looked at her reflection in the mirror long, carefully and critically. "If Jim doesn't kill me," she said to herself, "before he takes a second look at me, he'll say I look like a Coney Island chorus girl. But what could I do? Oh, what could I do with $1.87? At 7 o'clock the coffee was made and the frying pan was out of the back of the stove, hot and ready to cook the chops. Jim was never late. Della fobbled the fob chain in her hand and set it on the corner of the table near the door, as he always entered. Then, as she heard his step on the stairway, down the first flight, and then she turned white for just a moment. She had a habit of saying little silent prayers about the simplest everyday things, and now she whispered, "Please God, make him think I'm still pretty." The door opened and Jim stepped in and closed it. He looked thin and very serious, poor fellow. He was only 22, and to be burdened with a family. He needed a new overcoat, and he was without gloves. Jim stepped inside the door as immovable as a setter at the scent of a quail. His eyes were fixed upon Della, and there was an expression in them that she could not read, and it was terrifying. It was not anger, not surprise, not disapproval, not horror, nor any of the sentiments that she had been prepared for. He simply stared at her fixedly with that peculiar expression on his face. Della wiggled off the table and went for him. "Jim, darling," she cried, "don't look at me that way. I had my hair cut off and sold it because I couldn't have lived through Christmas without giving you a present. It'll grow out again. You won't mind, will you? I just had to do it. My hair grows awfully fast. Say Merry Christmas, Jim, and let's be happy. You don't know what a nice and beautiful, nice gift I got for you." You cut off your hair?" asked Jim laboriously, as if he had not arrived at that patented fact, yet after even the hardest mental labor. "Cut it off and sold it," said Della. "Don't you like me just as well, anyhow? I'm me without my hair, ain't I?" Jim looked at the room curiously. "You say your hair is gone?" he said, with an almost air of idiocy. "You needn't look for it," said Della. "It's sold, I told you. Sold and gone, too." "It's Christmas Eve, boy. Be good to me, for it went for you. Maybe the hairs of my head were numbered," she went on with sudden serious sweetness, "but nobody could ever count my love for you. Shall I put the chops on, Jim?" Out of his trance, Jim seemed quickly to wake. He enfolded his Della for 10 seconds and let regard with scrutiny some inconsequential object in the other direction. $8 a week. or $1,000,000 a year? What is the difference? A mathematician or a wit would give you the wrong answer. The Magi bought valuable gifts, but that was not among them. The dark assertion will be illuminated later on. Jim drew a package from his overcoat pocket and threw it upon the table. "Don't make any mistake, Dell," he said, "about me. I don't think there's anything in the way of a haircut or a shave or a shampoo that can make me like my girl any less. But if you'll unwrap that package, you may see why you had me going for a while at first." White fingers and nimble tore at a string paper, and then an ecstatic scream of joy, and then, alas, a quick phenomenon change to a hysterical tears and wails, necessitating the immediate employment of all comforting powers of the lord of the flat. For there lay the combs. The set of combs, side and back, that Della had worshipped for long in a Broadway window. Beautiful combs, pure turquoise shell, with jeweled rims, just the shade to wear in her beautiful vanished hair. They were expensive combs, she knew, and her heart had simply craved and yearned over them without the least hope of possession. And now they were hers. But the tresses that they should have adorned, the coveted adornments, were gone. But she hugged them on to her bosom, and at length she was able to look up with dim eyes and a smile and say, "My hair grows fast, Jim." And then Della leaped up a little singed cat and cried, "Oh, oh." Jim had not seen his beautiful present. She held it out to him eagerly upon her open palm. The dull, precious metal seemed to flash with a reflection of her bright and ardent spirit. "Isn't it a dandy, Jim? I hunted all over town to find it. You'll have to look at the time 100 times a day now. Give me your watch. I want to see how it looks on it." Instead of obeying, Jim tumbled down the couch and put his hands on the back of his head and smiled. "Dell," he said, "let's put our Christmas presents away and keep 'em a while. They're too nice to use just as presents. I sold the watch to get the money to buy your combs. And now you supposed to put the chops on." The Magi, as you know, were wise men, wonderfully wise men, who brought gifts to the babe in the manger. They invented the art of giving Christmas presents, being wise gifts. Their gifts were no doubt wise ones, possibly bearing the privilege of exchange in the case of duplication. And here I have lamentably related to you the uneventful chronicle of two foolish children in a flat who most unwisely sacrificed for each other the greatest treasures of their house. But in a last word to the wise of these days, let it be said that of all who give gifts, the two were the wisest. Of all who give and receive gifts, such are they the wisest. Everywhere they are wisest. They are the Magi. And that is one of my favorite O. Henry tales. Let that be with you as we embark upon this holiday season. And as we give and we receive, be grateful for the smallest of gift. They may have only had $1.87 and had to go out and sell something of theirs to get you a gift. Don't forget that. Put it in here. Put it in your heart. Have a little holiday in your heart. That's what I'm going to leave you with. God bless.